I told you this man was a treasure, right? It's great. When people think of, when you think of faceless public officials and a bureaucracy and civil servants, just be reminded that there are plenty of people in city government like this, although none quite like Joe Salvo. I'm going to introduce the panel first. They will then each speak individually, and then we'll have some questions among us and then take some from the floor. You've got full bios, I think, in programs, so I'll be relatively brief. Next to Joe Salvo is Gordon Campbell, the president and CEO of United Way of New York City. He's been CEO of Safe Horizon, was chief of staff to the first deputy mayor, served in other senior positions in the Koch, Dinkins, and Giuliani administrations. Chung-Hwa Hung is the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. It's an umbrella group for about 200 organizations around New York State. She came to the U.S. from Korea. She's worked for a range of nonprofits, the National Korean American Service and Education Consortium, the Committee of Interns and Residents, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. Karan Nazario is a student at George Westinghouse High School in Brooklyn. He's a map technician in the Community Information Technology Initiative youth program created by the Municipal Arts Society. It trains technicians. They receive a paid internship at Community Board 3 in Bedford-Stuyvesant. This month he received a Toma Faulkner Humanitarian Award for his work. And Vicki Bean is the Boxer Family Professor of Law at NYU School of Law, also an affiliated professor of public policy at NYU's Wagner School of Public Service, faculty director of NYU's Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy. She's a prolific author. She's written about environment, land use law, housing policy, zoning, and urban development, and most recently, the foreclosure crisis and community benefit agreements. Let's start with Gordon Campbell.
Great, thanks, Dan. But I also want to thank the Municipal Arts Society for having this panel and having me be part of it. And Joe was talking about seniors, and a century ago, life expectancy for boys was 41 years and 45 years for girls. Today in New York City, the life expectancy is 76 years for boys and 79 for girls. And as Joe said, not only for young people, but for seniors, this is a city of choice. I'm sure many of you know that people raise their family in the suburbs are moving into the city. In fact, 47% of New Yorkers that relocate to Florida come back to New York City. Surprise, surprise. We won't get into that. Well, that's a Joe, what that phenomenon is all about. And then also just in terms of healthier lifestyles, in terms of the advances in technology and medicine and the like, is really creating a different lifestyle for seniors. And Joe, I'd like to differ with you on one point. You talked about the infusion of vitality of young people, the energy. I also know that that happens on the senior level as well, particularly now that I'm a card-carrying member of AARP. So I'm getting to be very sensitive on that point. But truth be told, what are the assets that seniors can bring to bear? One is experience, a wealth of experience. Sam talked about his tenure at the New York Times, and just what can seniors do to give back? A great example of a program is a nonprofit program called Reserve, which actually Jack Rosenthal, formerly at the New York Times, is the chair of, in which it provides working opportunities for seniors to either be placed in not-for-profit organizations, businesses, and the like. Flexible schedules, they get a salary at a much smaller scale, but a real opportunity to continue to offer the skills. The second is civic engagement. There are so many seniors that are involved, but there's so many more opportunities where people should be tapping into seniors in terms of boards, community efforts, and the like. And then investments. Seniors in this city, there's a wide dichotomy, but many seniors have disposable income, and more businesses are recognizing this in terms of product differentiation, advertising, outreach, and the like. There's an initiative afoot. How many of you have heard of the Age-Friendly New York City initiative? It's really an outgrowth of the World Health Organization, which is really trying to ensure that great cities of the world not only support their residents as they age, but they tap into the tremendous resources. So there's been efforts underway in London, Mexico City, Tokyo, and Rio de Janeiro. And the mayor and the city council speaker, Chris Quinn, created the Age-Friendly Commission, and it's actually staffed by the New York Academy of Medicine. And they did a series of community conversations with seniors throughout the city in terms of finding out what are their issues, what are their concerns, what's missing in their life, what would they like to be able to do differently. And then there was a series of working groups focused around academia, civil society, business and labor, and health and social services. So for example, the business working group, Kathy Wild chaired, I chaired the health and social services. And so the decision was made to focus on 8 domains. And the first one is public spaces. 75% of seniors do not have an active lifestyle. And some of the reasons they cite is need for better maintained and better lit sidewalks, something in this city we're all too unfortunately familiar with, pedestrian safety, longer walking times for the signals, actually hearing that signal, easier access to affordable supermarkets. We all know that there is a food desert in all too many communities in this city. And then also parks that are more age-friendly appropriate. Transportation across the board is widely appreciated, but there's still accessibility issues in terms of most subway stations do not have elevators, that bicycle paths need to be more age-friendly, more seating in bus shelters, which we're already starting to see. And Vicki and I were talking about earlier, there's an issue around the other domain is housing, both an affordability perspective and inappropriate housing. As one ages, you might be in a classic 6, but you don't have that need for that large housing stock. So, and there's also a need for younger people that need to take advantage of that. So what can be done on the housing front and really focusing on NORCs or natural occurring retirement communities, possibly creating communal settings for seniors and the like. And then another area, 4 of the 8, is health and social services, and just working with my parents who are both 87 and helping them manage the healthcare system. It is such a challenge, and even when someone I'd like to think has some degree of sophistication and wherewithal and not very successful from in terms of discharge planning, in terms of accessing services and the like, and it continues to be a problem. So truth be told is what can we do to really take advantage of what seniors bring to bear, and not just for seniors. We have to remember we don't have the dollars and resources, so we need to think about how can our businesses be more friendly? How can universities, what can they do on the senior front? And we need to think across silos. It's not just the government doing everything. And also to understand that seniors' needs range and differ over time. Studies show that once an individual reaches 85, they are highly likely to have some health or a series of health issues. So you need to really understand the different phases of aging, and also to understand whether it's immigrant communities, communities for young people and like. These are all additions that would make such a difference in our city going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Chung-Hwa?
Great. I was asked to talk about the implications of the demographic changes that we saw on immigrant communities. I think basically there's 2 challenges. It's great that immigrants are providing the city with the kind of the vitality and energy and all the stuff that we talked about, but it comes not without controversy and challenges. So I think we have 2 challenges right now. Number 1 is to educate the broader public, and I don't mean just New York, but the rest of the country, that, that immigration is a net positive thing. I think a lot of us in New York know that where there's immigration, there's growth, and when there's growth, there's immigration. But there's a lot of people who don't understand that. Just to make the point here, let's imagine there's a lot of people around the country who want to deport everyone without immigration status, immigration papers. So what would happen if we removed all unauthorized immigrants from New York State? We would lose $28.7 billion, almost $30 billion in economic activity. We would also lose about $13 billion in state gross product. We would lose hundreds of thousands of jobs. Just one aspect of it is entrepreneurship. If you just look at Asian and Latino businesses who are, many of them are immigrants, Asian-owned businesses generate over $30 billion of economic activity, and they employ over 160,000 people. So the zero-sum argument that immigrants take away, as if we got rid of all the undocumented immigrants, everyone who's unemployed would all move into those jobs, just makes no sense. And I think we got to educate the public. Same with Latino businesses. They gross sales receipts for Latino businesses, $12 billion. employing over 70,000 people. So there's no question about the economic contributions of immigrants. But the anti-immigrants will often say, immigrants, you know, they all go to the schools and we all have to pay for their education when they're not paying taxes, which is just not true if you look at the overall picture. So our number one challenge, I think, is to educate the public about the net plus effect of immigration. Second, so is everything going really well and all we have to do is just let people know what's going on? I don't think so. There are policy interventions that we can make. When you have such large numbers of people trying to integrate into a community, our public policies can either promote their integration or obstruct their integration. And right now, there's so much more that we could do to help maximize immigrant contributions in our community and in our economy. So, for instance, we have such a long way to go to have immigrants have equal access. When I look at integration, sometimes I think of it as three different kind of criteria. Do immigrants have equal access to services and programs? Do immigrants have equal rights and equal resources? So if we kind of look at, you know, what our government is doing to remove barriers to equal access and rights and resources, there's just a lot we can do. For instance, ESL. Right? We need to be running more low-cost, affordable ESL classes. We are looking at a lot of the reserve retired volunteers are starting to volunteer, teach English to immigrants, but we need to set up an infrastructure so that we're capable of continuing to, we can just put people through the pipeline of, you know, ESL education. In the schools, the number of kids in our school system in New York City who don't speak English, who get tested and don't speak English, is $140,000, not dollars, sorry, students. That's bigger than twice the size of the entire San Francisco Unified School District, right? To go with the analogy, just like the number of immigrants in New York is bigger than the entire size of Los Angeles, just the kids who don't speak English. They also have the highest dropout rates. So we need to support them with additional English instruction and have a plan for getting them through our school system so that they don't feed into the pool of unemployed, rather they get on this trajectory of participating in the workforce to generate even more than what Joe told us about. And I'll end with my, my civic participation point. There's 1 million immigrant voters in New York State. That is huge, and that's a big number. But the other thing, this is kind of the births to mothers thing. If you look at the number of first-time voters, immigrants are about half of the electorate, the first-time voters coming into the part of the electorate that's expanding. And so if we're able to get people to vote right after they get sworn in as citizens, and at the New York Immigration Coalition, we've registered over 280,000 immigrants to vote, and we plan on continuing to do that. But we also need to do more work there, because when you do a survey, immigrants are contacted by political parties and other get-out-the-vote initiatives, unions, whatever the work that's going on at half the rate that other voters are contacted. And so we're also working with a multi-ethnic voter mobilization initiative that looks at getting people involved in our democracy, because just like they are infusing our economy with new vitality, I think a lot of immigrants have and will continue to infuse new vitality in our democracy, and are now a huge part of the majority of the city council, as Sam noted, who are members of color. So I remember the days when we're working with a very small kind of Latino black caucus. Now the caucus is more than half, so it doesn't, it's kind of the majority. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in immigrant communities, and there's a lot of opportunities for public policy on the very local level, from like the community board level to city government, state, federal level, to really maximize the contributions of immigrants in all sectors of our society.
Karan?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karan Nazario. I am here on behalf of the City Youth Interns and youth throughout the city. The name of my presentations is Teens in the Dynamic City. The City Youth Program is led by the Municipal Art Society, which works in partnerships with our local community boards. Every month, the City Youth Internship Program sends out about 40 students to attend different community board meetings. At these meetings, we give firsthand information to community debates, community information, and also land use meetings. Today, I will be discussing livability from the perspectives of 3 youth in our programs. I will be discussing housing with Taisha from Manhattan, open space with Brandon from the Bronx, and myself on jobs from Brooklyn. Housing. Taisha from Harlem says, "My neighborhood would be better with less crime and more affordable, diverse housing options." Many of our youth feel that their communities are unsafe. They feel that crime rates are too high and they're scared in their own neighborhoods. With the cost of housing rising, many families are unable to afford housing. With families unable to afford housing, they are forced to move out and youth in our city are displaced. Having diverse housing options in our city with high, low, and middle income housing creates a balance in our community. Having a balance in our communities strengthens our community. Open space. Open space is an issue that not only affects our youth, but it also affects people of all ages in our community. Brandon from Kingsbridge says, "Kids like us need a spot to hang out and to be ourselves. It is too bad that others abuse parks with gang activity and drugs. For those that need open space, there is not enough of it." Open space gives youth a place to go, have fun, and to stay fit. It also gives them a place to relieve their stress and to be themselves. It also gives youth a place to have a social life and to come together as a community. For example, Saratoga Park in my community is a place where people of all ages love to come hang out. Everybody in the park knows each other, and everyone is themselves. Also, youth throughout the city feel that the city should reevaluate and reconsider which parks are in greatest need of reconstruction. My last, but far from least concern in the youth population is jobs. In this economy, when many families have to cut back, teens are seeking employment to help make up the difference. In this troubled economy, there are fewer jobs, with adults and even some elders applying for jobs that normally only youth would. It creates a scarce job market. Having scarce job markets in our communities forces our youth to go out in other neighborhoods and seek work. Out of my group of 10 friends, myself and only one other are the only ones that are employed with part-time jobs. However, my friend has to travel from Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn to 34th Street in Manhattan to work at a Wendy's. Creating internships and job training programs gives our youth options. It gives them an opportunity to gain and practice professional work skills. Having a better prepared future, it makes their quality of life and livability easier in their futures. If you would like to find out more about our program, you can check out our website. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
And obviously another great MAS program. Vicki?
Yes, thank you. Well, first let me start by thanking the Municipal Art Society and its visionary president, Vin Cipolla, and its very talented and dedicated staff for sponsoring this conversation and for sponsoring a program that brings folks like Karen and brings our young people into the conversation, which is so, so important. So thank you, Vin, and the Municipal Art Society. I want to spend my few minutes talking about, I think, two of the challenges that the demographic changes that Joe mentioned and the livability findings that Vin reported for us earlier this morning really pose. I think the first challenge is how do we ensure that livability and that improvements in livability are equitably distributed among the different racial and ethnic groups and neighborhoods within our diverse city. And then the second challenge is really how to ensure that our land use decisions promote rather than hinder livability for that changing population. I'm going to borrow Joe's slide just to reorient us here and to talk for a minute about the challenges posed by on the equity question. This is Joe's slide showing where our foreign-born immigrants are pouring into the city. And of course, they are concentrated now in Queens and Brooklyn, along with Washington Heights and Inwood. Now, every year at the Furman Center, we publish an annual State of the City's Housing and Neighborhoods. And in the volume that we published earlier this year, we took a hard look at some of these neighborhoods and really previewed the kinds of concerns that Chung-Hwa raised. So these immigrant neighborhoods have many, many strengths, but they also face some livability challenges. On average, the 8 community districts where a majority of residents are foreign-born enjoy lower rates of crime, lower rates of tax delinquencies, lower rates of foreclosure, and lower rates of poverty. But on the other hand, immigrant New Yorkers also have lower median incomes, lower rates of educational attainment, and higher rates of crowding and crowded living conditions than native-born residents do. If we broaden the frame for a minute and talk about our minority households, regardless of nativity, we see a somewhat different pattern of distribution. So this is the map that shows you the areas and the community districts in New York by their percent minority. And we see a different spatial distribution with northern Brooklyn, southeast Queens, and Harlem and Bronx, and the Bronx housing most of our minority residents. In those neighborhoods, the picture is less mixed, and unfortunately, it's more bleak. So we see that those New Yorkers and their neighborhoods face many livability challenges. The poverty rate for, if you look at that on your left, you see the comparison in terms of the poverty rate of whites versus the second bar is blacks, the third bar Hispanics, and then the last bar Asians. The minority populations in the city are also much more vulnerable to infrastructure deficiencies, to the quality of life and livability concerns, because they are more likely to be using much of that infrastructure. So you see the graph on the right shows the difference in travel time to work by race, and you see that Black, Hispanic, and Asian populations spend a lot more time on public transit and a lot more time in travel. Of course, one of the critical crises that's facing our neighborhoods right now, and that's very much impacting on the livability of the city, is the foreclosure crisis. And the neighborhoods that are where there is a concentration of minorities, or there are a very high percentage of minorities, are facing the brunt of that crisis. It is no accident that the boroughs that are facing the brunt of that crisis are the ones that did report much lower levels of satisfaction with their neighborhoods and much greater concerns with crime and other problems. So we face enormous challenges, I think, in improving the livability of those neighborhoods. But we also face enormous challenges, as Karen noted, in providing housing and providing affordable housing in those neighborhoods. Immigrants and native-born racial and ethnic minorities face very severe housing challenges. Among renters, 26% of the foreign-born New Yorkers were paying more than 50% of their income just in rent alone, compared to only about 21% of native-born households. Both rent burden and severe crowding is considerably higher for racial and ethnic minorities, regardless of their country of origin. And immigrant neighborhoods, with the exception of Flushing and Whitestone, saw below average rates of construction during the boom years. And so that really brings us to the question of whether the city's land use decisions and processes are meeting the challenge of providing livable neighborhoods to all New Yorkers and of providing housing to those New Yorkers. And so I want to look at that second question about our land use processes just very briefly. It's much more than a 5-minute conversation, of course, but to motivate the conversation, the Furman Center identified New York City's, what we would call New York City's higher opportunity neighborhoods, those neighborhoods that have good schools, good transit, low crime rates, provide high environmental quality, and so on. And we then took a look at the rezonings that the city has passed over the last 8 or so years and tried to understand the relationship between them. For the city to best target growth to the areas that are high opportunity, we would want to see upzonings that allowed more housing, that allowed growth in those higher opportunity neighborhoods, and we would be wary about downzoning or preventing additional housing in those neighborhoods. What we see instead is somewhat different. What we see is that of the rezonings, while about 62% of New York City lots are in those high opportunity neighborhoods, a smaller share of the upzone lots, the lots where we're projecting that growth will grow, that growth will go, where we're allowing more growth, fewer of them are in the high opportunity neighborhoods. And what we see is that the areas that are downzoned to not allow further growth are disproportionately in those high opportunity neighborhoods. Now, of course, we have to be careful not to overwhelm those high opportunity neighborhoods, not to allow growth that would destroy the quality of life in those neighborhoods. But we also have to be careful that we're opening up high opportunity neighborhoods to a wider range and a more diverse range of New Yorkers. So the last thing that I'll mention in terms of this is another way of looking at it is to see, well, are we directing growth to those areas that have the kind of amenities that we want, that can accommodate that kind of density and the growth? And again, when we look here, we see that in terms of whether or not the city is channeling growth into areas that have good access to transit, areas that have good parks. What we see is that while we are certainly channeling growth into those areas, we are also preventing growth in many of the neighborhoods that already have those good opportunities and those good services. So I think, as I said, this is a much longer conversation, but I think that Joe's presentation and the livability findings really remind us, and I think challenge us to use Joe's frame, that when New Yorkers, or when the world looks back at New York 100 years from now, we want to start the discussion now that will ensure that when they look back, they will say that we promoted better neighborhoods and we promoted greater livability for the new as well as existing New Yorkers, for poor as well as rich, for old and young as well as the folks who haven't quite yet received their AARP cards, and for immigrants and minorities as well as whites. So thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Just to prove that even demographers have a sense of humor, one said not long ago that at the rate that Mormons are reproducing in Utah and Hasidic Jews are reproducing in Brooklyn, by the middle of the century, they will all meet in Indiana. That's not likely, but Joe was talking about where we will be looking back 100 years from now. The city has done a lot of planning for 2030, which is only 20 years from now. Without putting a damper on the survey and what we've discussed here, I'd like to ask Joe in particular, but any of the other members of the panel who want to weigh in, what worries you most about potential change in the city? It's hard to predict, obviously, the impact of globalization, immigration, refugees, epidemics, earthquakes, and the like, and what impact they might have. But we all know that the growth, the evolution of this city has been cyclical. There have been ups and downs. We are now, by most measures, in something of an up, particularly when you look at where this city was as recently as 20 years ago. What concerns you most about keeping that cycle in a positive vein, and are there things that government can do to keep it positive? Joe?
I would say on the heels of some of what you just heard from Vicki, it's policies that promote a city that continues to be welcoming and tolerant, a city that continues to be an attractive place for people, regardless of all those things that in the world divide us. So it's policies that promote that, and certainly livable neighborhoods is the key. As my commissioner, Amanda Burden, has always said, that it's promoting neighborhood quality and maintaining the integrity of our neighborhoods that is key. It's approaching it from a very local level and maintaining the environment an environment that is attractive, and this is something from a planning standpoint. I mean, you have other sessions involving the philosophy of Jane Jacobs. New York City is supposed to be dense in a lot of places. Density could be good, very good. You want that. All you got to do is ask one of these mayors from upstate New York who comes down here and fetches a bunch of immigrants and says, come on up, Bosnians from Staten Island, to Utica. Okay, they get to Utica. There's no foot traffic in Utica. There's no energy there. I'm picking on Utica. I don't mean to pick on Utica.
It's a good example.
Yeah, there's no energy. The synergies that we talk about, I don't like that word either, but that we need here to develop the critical mass does not develop in these places because they don't have the intersection of economy, population, livability. I agree, livability, very important. Those are the things that come together and produce an environment that people want to be part of, pure and simple. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Karen?
I would like to say the thing that concerns me the most is gentrification, because it's good, it can help communities, but at the same time, it can cause the cost of housing to go up, and at the same time, that can make livability harder in different communities for the people. So I think that there should be a cap on housing and everything like that.
I'd like to open it up to the floor because we only have, believe it or not, about 8 minutes left. You could address the panel in general or a panelist in particular. Please, questions only and not speeches, if you will. And there are mics in 2 of the aisles. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Sean McLaren. I'm with Arts-Based Projects. Wonderful and inspiring presentations. Thank you all for that.
We will take compliments, though.
My question is for all of you, but specifically to Vicki, if I may. In thinking about some of the recommendations, such as upzoning, as a means to address the idea of livability broadly writ, I'm wondering if you could comment specifically on how you view the upzoning that's occurred in Williamsburg, the degree to which that has had a positive impact on the community and some of the things we're talking about, and also some of the policy implications. I think that the idea of affordable housing and trying to provide additional units or requiring them is something we all know was a part of that discussion. So anything in that or beyond is kind of where I'd really like to hear your thoughts.
Vicki?
Okay, I mean, I think a couple of things to note about the Williamsburg rezoning. As you note, the Williamsburg rezoning was really the first major rezoning in the city to initiate a new form of inclusionary zoning where increases in density were also tied to the provision of affordable housing. So I think that's one very positive thing about the rezoning. I think another very positive thing about the rezoning is the tie of the rezoning to the development of our underused waterfronts, to tie the rezoning to the development of park space being provided along that waterfront. On the other side is the question about whether sufficient attention was paid to where are we going to be able to move some of that affordable housing, for example, into the interior parts, not right on the waterfront, and whether we provided for enough of that opportunity for affordable housing to be located throughout Williamsburg. And then, of course, I think there's a broader question that the Williamsburg rezoning, among many of the rezonings, pose, which is the involvement of the community in the thinking, in the planning, and the sort of monitoring of how it rolls out. We can't always predict the future, in terms of those rezonings perfectly, and so the involvement of the community in monitoring what's happening, making adjustments as we see the way it's rolling out.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Liz Cohen. I'm a 20th century U.S. historian at Harvard. And I have a question that I'd like to ask you. Sam Roberts, when you started this off, this last question, you said, what worries you the most? And your sub-question was, what kinds of things can government do to help in those areas? And want to point out, we're living in an era of a lot of anti-government feeling and incapacity on the part of government. And I'd like to ask the panelists to what extent you think that is a very difficult challenge when we live in an era that promotes the private sector solving many of these kinds of social problems.
Anyone?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I mean, I'm a big fan, having spent 12 years in New York City government, and understand the need for policies and zoning and the like. But I really think it comes right back to us. One of the areas that the Age-Friendly Commission is focusing on is respect and inclusion. And so I think in terms of what worries me the most is to ensure that the degree of respect for all ages, all communities, and the like, that we as New Yorkers can continue it, because this city that speaks 180 languages, and Joe talks, so somehow we're able to get along, government is only going to be able to do so much. And when you look at New York City, Albany, and Washington, it really comes right back to us.
I think for immigrants, last year over 400,000 immigrants were deported. And you can just imagine the kind of law enforcement, detention, enforcement, infrastructure that was kind of apparatus that was built to kind of make that happen. So I think this is one case where government, our federal government in particular, they have not solved the immigration problem so that it actually serves the economic and security interests of the country. But now our current immigration policies actually obstruct the very economic and security goals that we all kind of support. And so I think the example of the immigration reform just not getting done on the federal level is a huge problem of especially election year politics, just kind of taking over any sort of substantive debate about what needs to be done. We have the policy solutions. The elected officials will not do it, and so now we're having to fit. And I think maybe this is kind of part of democracy. We now have to fit our issue into now the post-midterm elections and pre-presidential election dynamics, and try to make the immigration reform into a good policy and good politics, which they know in the long term. But I think they just can't. It's just too tempting to make immigrants into red meat, for the short term. And so unless we get out of that cycle, and I don't know, if you're a professor, I would love to hear from you, but how do we break out of this election cycle? Because we have elections every year, and every year we're dealing with this. So it's hugely frustrating.
We have three people who have invested the time to stand at the mic, so I'd love to get them all in. It's going to be close. Yes, sir.
I'm Ernie Hutton. I'm active with AIA and APA. And Vicki, your focus on the high opportunity areas and the disparity sometimes between upzoning and downzoning, I think is very important. But I think it also, I'd like your comments and others on the need to look at the low opportunity neighborhoods. And it seems to me that's what the livability issue was all about, is how to spread investment and spread initiatives and so on to the areas where in-place activities can take place, both in terms of zoning, but also capital improvements and so on.
Vicki?
Absolutely. We have to both provide access to existing high opportunity neighborhoods, and we have to bring up those lower opportunity neighborhoods. And to relate back to the prior question, I think we have a golden opportunity here to say, actually, New York is an example of where government and government-private partnerships have done an amazing job. The Koch housing plan, carried forward by many of the mayors and embraced now by Mayor Bloomberg, and indeed expanded by Mayor Bloomberg, have made an enormous difference in our neighborhoods. They have been an enormous success story. So we have an opportunity to say, we've done it, it works, we're bringing up those neighborhoods that are low opportunity, we're providing greater opportunity in those neighborhoods, just at the same time that we're making sure that those high opportunity neighborhoods are not exclusively rich or exclusively white.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Mary Abate from Queens Community House, a settlement house. Okay, the panel has touched on aging, immigration, and youth. And social service agencies saw about 40% cuts in our ESLL, our aging services, and our youth employment services. You talked about equity and equity of resources and policy. Well, can someone or anyone respond to the city budget or the state budget as policy and a policy resource, and taxation and the taxation system as a source and a way of creating equity? I know taxes is a dirty word, but I think we need to create a revenue stream to be allocated toward that 40% loss of jobs, et cetera.
Anybody want a quick answer?
Yeah, just in terms of, I'm a big fan of settlement houses. In fact, a board member of Bronx Works. But there is a real challenge in terms of social service cuts. Today in the Wall Street Journal, there's a discussion about the cuts for the Department of Aging. The mayor has a 5.4% peg for this year, 8% for next year, the biggest peg that I've ever seen. The reduction in aid to localities by the state. I wish I had an answer. I think it's a real challenge in terms of the safety net.
And one that is likely to get worse in the year ahead. Yes, sir. Last question.
Hi, Will Martin with the Architectural League of New York. My question is concerning demographics and kind of the concept of, you know, like the role of a citizen and how we're talking about New York City. And I'd be curious to hear the kind of responsibility in the larger context of a resident of the state at large and relationships with demographic changes in places like Buffalo, and how in ways there might be opportunities for inter-city collaboration perhaps, and using the built environment which we already have to create new opportunities kind of among this citizenship conceived of at a larger
Anybody
scale.
want a quick answer? No, you baffled us. But thank you for asking. Isn't it great to hear from smart people? Thanks to the panel, and thanks to you for coming.
Thank you. No, this is great.